Hello, and welcome back to STM's Crime and Paranormal Podcast. It's your host, Ashley, and today we are going to talk about the murders of Channon Christian and Christopher Newsom. Channon Gail Christian was 21, and Hugh Christopher Newsom Jr. was 23, and they were from Knoxville, Tennessee. Channon Christian was actually born on April 29th of 1985 in Nacogdoches, Texas. And that's whenever she would move from Louisiana to Tennessee with her family in the year of 1997. So she graduated the year of 2003 at Farragut High School and was a senior majoring in sociology at the University of Tennessee in Knoxville. She did plan to graduate from the University of Tennessee in December of 2007. Chris, so they call him Chris, Newsom Jr. was born on September 21st of 1983 in Knoxville, Tennessee. He had played baseball for the Hall High School Red Devils, and he graduated in 2002. He would then attend Pellissippi State Technical Community College after high school, and he eventually became a carpenter. On January 6th of 2007, it was a normal Saturday. Christian would go to her friend's apartment so she could get ready for the night. So 8 p.m. rolls around, and Christian's friend had decided that they were going to go ahead and head over to the party that they were going to attend that night. Christian decided to stay behind to wait for Newsom to pick her up instead of going with her friends. So he would arrive, and him and Christian would go to the apartment complex parking lot together. So they left the apartment and walked out to the parking complex parking lot together. As the couple were walking out to the parking lot, they would have no idea that they were actually being watched. They were being observed standing close to Christian's vehicle, and they were embracing each other. So they were like giving each other a hug or a kiss. So when Christian and Newsom didn't show up to their friend's party, that's when their friends would then begin to call and text the couple, but they wouldn't receive a response back. So around 11 p.m., two of Newsom's friends went to the apartment, and they would find his truck in the parking lot. They were not able to locate Christian's SUV, so Newsom's truck was still left there and the SUV was gone. On January 7th, Christian had failed to answer any calls from her mother and one of her friends. She also didn't show up for work that day. Friends and family would check local hospitals and filed missing person reports. Christian's parents would request help from law enforcement, but they had been told that they would have to search themselves. So they had to search for their daughter on their own instead of police helping them. So after being told this, Christian's parents would seek help from Christian's mobile phone provider. And then they had learned that her phone would last ping at a Cherry Street phone tower. So Christian and Newsom's family and friends would search all through Cherry Street. They would find Christian's Toyota 4Runner, which is the SUV, between 1:30 a.m. and 2 a.m. on Monday, January 8th. Items were noticed missing from Christian's vehicle that included a teddy bear and photos she kept in there along with her phone charger and her iPod. They would also notice that the front seats had been pushed all the way back, and Christian would not have been able to reach the pedals with how far back that these seats were. The floorboard had also been covered in mud, and according to friends and family, Christian would never leave her vehicle in that kind of condition. So they're already suspicious at this point. Stickers that she had on the outside windows had also been removed, and inside of the 4Runner, they seen a pack of Newport cigarettes, and neither Christian or Newsom smoked. So police would also recover, I guess police ended up getting involved. So police would also recover an envelope that was in the vehicle and would find fingerprints That would lead them to a Lamarcus Davidson of Chipman Street. That was only 2 blocks away from where the Forerunner had been located. So there was a witness who was a driver for Waste Connections, and he would arrive at work on Chipman Street at around 12:30 a.m. on January 7th. He would notice that the lights in 2316 Chipman Street were on, and the house was rather busy for the time of night that it was. So this witness would say he had saw a Forerunner drive slowly by him. The SUV would slow down for about 20 seconds as if the people in the SUV were checking him out. He would see 4 black men in the Forerunner. The people observing them would turn out to be their assailants. At this point, they had decided they were going to attack the couple. So Christian and Newsom were then forced into the back seat of Christian's SUV while at gunpoint. So this is what had happened whenever they were out in the parking garage. So this was before the SUV was checking out the Waste Connections employee. So now we're going to get into what had happened into the parking lot. Christian and Newsom were forced into the back seat of Christian's SUV while at gunpoint. The assailants would then tie their hands behind their backs and were driven to Davidson's house at 2316 Chipman Street. There were 5 perpetrators. The first one being George Giovanni Detroit Thomas, who was born on January 23rd of 1983. There was a Latelvis Darnell Rome Cobbins, born December 20th of 1982. A Lamarcus Deval Slim Davidson, born June 13th of 1981, who was half-brothers with Latelvis Cobbins. There was a Vanessa Lynn Coleman, born June 29th of 1988, and an Eric Dwayne E. Boyd, born February 18th of 1972. So, Christian and Newsom were both raped. They believe Chris Newsom was actually raped inside Davidson's house. The Knox County acting medical examiner would state that Newsom had been sodomized with an object, and it was actually raped by at least one of the perpetrators. They would then take Newsom to a set of railroad tracks where they had forced him to walk barefoot to the location that they would later murder him at. The prosecutors would believe that they used a mangled dog leash that was found on a hill to lead Newsom to the railroad tracks where he had walked to his death. When he was murdered, his hands were bound behind his back and his feet were also bound together. They blindfolded him with a bandana and gagged him with a sock. So the only clothing Newsom had on was his shirt and his underwear. They had shot him in his neck and in his back. Sadly, he was still alive and suffered for a while until they decided to shoot him in the back of his head. The shot was fired with the muzzle against his head above his right ear, and it had severed his brainstem. They would then set Newsom's body on fire. Another witness that lived a block or so from the 2316 Chapman Street had heard 3 pops around the area of the train tracks at about 1:45 a.m. Christian at this point is still alive and was being held as a prisoner inside of Davidson's home, mainly in the north bedroom. Prosecutors would believe that Vanessa Coleman had held Christian captive while the other male perpetrators were murdering Newsom. The male perpetrators would then return to Davidson's house after they murdered Newsom and would beat and rape Christian multiple times. A medical examiner would testify that Christian had died hours after she was tortured and had multiple severe head injuries and suffered several severe injuries to her vagina, anus, and mouth due to being sexually assaulted. Her injuries were also consistent with being raped with an object as well. A medical examiner would say that her sexual attack was extreme and much more than a simple sexual assault. Prosecutors would believe that Davidson and Cobbins would orally rape her while she was tied to a chair. She had also been anally and vaginally raped. Christian was beaten and kicked in her vagina and beat on her head. She would suffer severe hemorrhaging to her head and vaginal area. She would have multiple bruises and carpet burns over much of her body. Davidson would say in his confession that Christian would say that she didn't want to die. So before they would kill Christian, her captivators would try to remove DNA evidence by pouring bleach down her throat and would scrub her body, which had included her bleeding and battered genital area, with bleach. She had been bound in a hog-tied way with curtains and bedding. They covered her face tight with a small trash bag and stashed her body in 5 larger trash bags. Christian was naked besides having her camisole and sweater on, and she would be tied in a fetal position, placed inside a residential waste disposal unit, and was covered with sheets while she was still alive. Medical examiner would testify at trial that Christian was slowly suffocated to death. She would have died between the afternoon of January 7th and the afternoon of January 8th. So this poor girl suffered. While Christian was suffocating, Davidson would leave to spend some time with his girlfriend and would give her Christian's belongings, her personal belongings. Davidson would also use Newsom's cell phone and would wear his shoes after he murdered him. Newsom's body had been discovered on January 7th at 12:20 p.m. by a Norfolk Southern Railroad employee. There was semen inside of Newsom's body, but the DNA from the semen had been destroyed when they caught his body on fire. A comforter had been wrapped around his body and a sweatshirt wrapped around his head. Police had went to 2316 Chipman Street on Tuesday, January 9th, and found that the house had been unoccupied and found Christian's body in a trash can that was located in the kitchen. They had found Davidson's prints on the bags that Christian was placed in and also found his prints on the inside of the garbage bags. Davidson's sperm would be found in Christian's vagina and anus, but Cobbin's sperm would be found in her mouth. They had also found other items of Christian and Newsom inside of that house, which included Christian's purse, clothing that she had in her vehicle, his shoes, a camera, photos in which they ripped and burned, and her iPad. They would then find Newsom's baseball caps and his driver's license. Quite a bit of their belongings would have Davidson's fingerprints on them. The items from Christian's 4Runner had been shoved into trash bags. Police would also find Davidson's sperm on her jeans, while Cobbin's sperm was found on her cami, sweater, and her jeans. Shell casings had been found at Davidson's house that would match the bullets that killed Newsom. So after finding Christian's body and discovering the semen from Davidson, they would soon call on a manhunt for Davidson. Police would find phone calls between Davidson and Boyd, so they would then question Boyd for information on where Davidson could be. Boyd would tell them about a vacant house he was probably at, and that is where on January 11th, Davidson had been arrested in this vacant house. The house is where police would find Newsom's Nike shoes and a .22 caliber high standard revolver. After they arrested Davidson, they would then take him into interrogation, asking about the murders. So Davidson would tell 5 different stories about what had happened to Christian and Newsom. At first, he claimed that they had left the house on Friday and didn't know anything about the crimes that had happened. He then would later tell police that Cobbins and Thomas had arrived at his house around 10 p.m. on Friday or Saturday and had told him that they carjacked some people that was still in the vehicle. He then would claim to have seen the victims tied up in the back seat and didn't want any part of the crime, so he just left and went and smoked some marijuana. Davidson stated that he returned to the house 20 minutes later to find Christian, and that's when she told him she didn't want to die. Then he used Christian's vehicle to deal drugs and would wipe it clean. Davidson had claimed that he didn't go past the living room and that he had never raped Christian. Thomas, Cobbins, and Coleman were all arrested in Lebanon, Kentucky on January 11th. Investigators would seize a computer that Thomas and Cobbins had viewed the media coverage of the murders on. Police also seized a purse that had contained quite a bit of Christian's personal belongings. After the arrest, Cobbins would then give his statement to investigators. He claimed that him, Davidson, and Boyd drove to an apartment complex for someone to meet a girl. Once they go to the apartment complex, they seen the SUV with a female in the driver's seat as she was speaking to a male. Cobbins said that Davidson and Boyd basically carjacked them and had ordered Cobbins to drive back to Chipman Street. Cobbins states that once they arrived at the residence on Chipman, Davidson would then take the woman into a bedroom and Boyd would then drive away with the man. When Boyd returned, the man was no longer with him. Cobbins would deny having any kind of sexual intercourse with Christian, which was the female victim. He also admitted to being present in the house during the time of the crimes and said Christian was being held hostage by the other defendants. So after Thomas, Cobbins, and Coleman were arrested, police would find a journal that had an entry from January 9th, and it reads as followed. Last night was one of a kind. We stayed with a crackhead that is cool as hell. It snowed a little bit, but it's already melted. Let's talk about Avengers. I had one hell of an adventure since I've been in the Big TN, which stands for Tennessee. It's a crazy world these days, but I love the fun adventures and lessons that I've learned. It's going to be a long, interesting year. So forensics would determine the document was verified as a handwriting of Coleman. So she literally wrote this in a journal and said that it was one hell of an adventure, that we can only assume she was talking about the carjacking and the murders of Christian and Newsom. So their charges. We'll start with George Thomas. He faced a total of 46 charges, indicted on 16 counts of felony murder related to rape, robbery, and kidnapping, 2 counts of premeditated murder, 2 counts of especially aggravated robbery, 4 counts of especially aggravated kidnapping, 20 counts of aggravated rape, and 2 counts of theft. Latalvis Cobbins got 46 charges, which were the same as Thomas. He was also charged with assaulting a correctional officer while incarcerated pending trial. In 2003, Cobbins had already been convicted of third-degree robbery in New York. So Lamarcus Davidson got 46 charges, which were also the same as Thomas's. He had actually just completed a 5-year sentence in Tennessee on a previous felony of carjacking and aggravated robbery. He was also indicted for a second robbery that was committed at a Pizza Hut just a day after the murders. So he went and committed robbery at a Pizza Hut right after they murdered these people. Vanessa Coleman, she faced 40 Tennessee state charges, indicted on 12 counts of felony murder related to rape, robbery, kidnapping, and the theft of Christian and Newsom. 1 count of premeditated murder, which was only of Christian's murder. 1 count of especially aggravated robbery, which was only of Newsom. 4 counts of especially aggravated kidnapping. 20 counts of aggravated rape, and 2 counts of theft. Eric Boyd was indicted by a federal grand jury in Eastern District of Tennessee, but would later be tried in Tennessee on state charges and that was over a decade later. So over a decade later, after being indicted by the federal grand jury in Eastern District of Tennessee, he was tried on state charges in Tennessee. He was arrested in connection with the fatal carjacking of Christian and Newsom. He would not be indicted by the Knox County grand jury, but would be indicted by a federal grand jury on August 23rd, 2007. The grand jury would then return a superseding indictment, which was charging him with accessory to carjacking that resulted in serious bodily injury to another person and misprision of a felony. However, later on, Boyd would be accused by Thomas and Cobbins of the rape and murder of Newsom. So a search warrant was obtained for his DNA, and he would later be convicted on state charges in 2019. Vanessa Coleman is now being held at the Tennessee Prison for Women, which is now known as the Deborah K. Johnson Rehabilitation Center in Nashville. She is serving 35-year sentence and was eligible for parole in 2017, but instead got parole in 2014 for good behavior, but she was denied. So she was then eligible again in 2020, but was also denied and would not be eligible again for parole for another 10 years. Cobbins and Thomas were originally incarcerated at Riverbend Maximum Security Institution in Nashville. They were then transferred to Bledsoe County Correctional Complex in Pikeville once it opened in 2012. Cobbins is currently serving a life sentence without parole at the Northwest Correctional Complex. Thomas is serving a 50-year sentence at the Northeast Correctional Complex, and his sentence ends May 2053. Davidson was sentenced to death on October 30th of 2009 and is incarcerated at the Riverbend Maximum Security Institution. Eric Boyd had been serving his sentence of 18 years at Federal Correction Institution Beakley, which was a medium security prison near Beaver, West Virginia, and had potentially been eligible for release in 2022, but was instead found guilty on charges of rape and first-degree murder on August 13th of 2019. So he was immediately sentenced to life in prison. This is the murder of Christian and Newsom, which is their last names. 5 people were involved in this murder. And it's not only murder, it was rape, it was murder, it was torture. The fact that Newsom suffered until they shot him that last time, I can't even imagine how he felt. And Christian suffering with being suffocated, and they don't know exactly when she passed away because she suffered in that trash can. They threw her away like she was trash. They burned him like he was trash. It's terrible. I feel for their families, and I feel for them. And I just, like, their family was so determined to figure out what happened to their children, adult children, where the police were not worried at this time until the parents stepped in and did something. That's sad. So this is the case on Christian and Newsom, and I hope that you guys have a wonderful morning, day, night, wherever you are in this world. And thank you for listening, and we will see you on the next episode.